What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. It is time for our Week 8 playoff eliminator following Week 7 of the 2022 college football season. We're getting to that point where the playoff field is starting to really narrow, and we're not going to have as many eliminations each week. We've got 4 this week, but the playoff picture itself has changed a lot, and we will get to that as well. So let's start with the teams that had already been eliminated coming into this week. You can see a huge list of teams. Like I said, we are really starting to narrow this thing down. We're into the second half of the season now. And the new eliminations for this week, we've got Kansas, Mississippi State, Minnesota, and NC State. So it was fun while it lasted with Kansas. It was a great story to see this team do what they did in the first 5 games, but now it's kind of back to the old Kansas. I still think they can win maybe another couple of games, get to a bowl game, and have a really good year. I mean, it's already been a great year, but they can still have a solid year. They're not going to make the playoff, obviously, and I don't really see them getting to the Big 12 championship or anything like that, but still can have a very good year for Kansas. Minnesota, I thought that they actually would probably beat Illinois last week. They did not, and so they're now out of it. Mississippi State had a great chance to beat Kentucky. They lost that game. Now they're out of it. And they've got an angry Alabama team coming up next. And NC State, you have to wonder if Devin Leary had been healthy, would they have possibly won that game against Syracuse? And how far could they have gone? Now NC State is really dropped off. I mean, it's good. Without him, I think they're going to lose multiple games here down the stretch. So let's go now to the teams that have 1 loss, but they're still alive. And there is Alabama. There is Alabama with 1 loss. Illinois, Kansas State, North Carolina, Oklahoma State, Oregon, Penn State, USC, and Wake Forest. So at this point in the season, yes, Alabama and Illinois are on the same group of teams here, along with Kansas State. Again, North Carolina, Oklahoma State, Oregon, Penn State, USC, Wake Forest. All these teams, you know, if you look at these teams, who has the best shot? Obviously, Alabama is going to be number 1 on the list because they can still win the SEC, and they're going to be favored in the rest of their games in the regular season, I'm sure. You look at Kansas State, it's going to be tough for them. Illinois, I mean, they have to play Michigan in the regular season, and then they have to win, of course, the Big Ten championship game. I don't see that happening. Kansas State with the loss to Tulane, probably not going to make it. North Carolina would have to win out, probably beat Clemson in the ACC championship. Don't really see that happening. Oklahoma State's in a good spot, even though they did lose to TCU. They have a chance to win out, and I think that loss will be forgivable on the road against a really good NC State, or against a really good TCU team in overtime. So yeah, keep an eye on Oklahoma State, Alabama. Oregon's still alive. If they can win out, they're going to have a great argument. Penn State, I mean, if they couldn't beat Michigan, I don't really see them beating Ohio State. So they're not looking great. USC's kind of in the same boat as Oregon. If they win out, they're going to have a great shot. Wake Forest is in trouble because they're not, I mean, they need Clemson to lose 2 games, and that's just not going to happen. 2 conference games. And Wake Forest is not a big enough name brand. They don't have the schedule where they could have really any chance to get in at 11-1, in my opinion. Although I think there's a real shot that Wake Forest does go 11-1. If you look at their schedule, especially with Devin Leary now out at NC State, Wake Forest, I'm telling you, this team can be 11-1 at the end of the year. That wouldn't shock me. 10-2 is actually, they're very likely, I think, to go 10-2. All right, so how about the teams that are still undefeated? Clemson, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Ole Miss, Syracuse, TCU, Tennessee, and UCLA. Raise your hand if you had Syracuse staying undefeated longer than Alabama. Yes, Syracuse is definitely the surprise team on this list. UCLA also, I think, a surprise. TCU as well. I mean, those 3 teams, I don't think anyone really expected them to be undefeated at this time. Clemson has already played, you know, a lot of their tougher games. NC State, Wake Forest, Florida State. They're on cruise control now. I know they have Miami coming up. They've been awful, though, this year. Notre Dame has not been good. Clemson it looks like they're going to cruise right into the college football playoff and probably do so undefeated. Georgia's got some tough games coming up. Of course, Tennessee, Michigan, Ohio State will play each other later on. Ole Miss, schedule's going to get tougher for them. LSU on the road Saturday. They'll have Alabama coming up. So I don't know how long they're going to stay on this list. Syracuse, if they can shock the world, if they can beat Clemson on Saturday, and when I say that about Clemson being on cruise control, that's if they beat Syracuse after this Syracuse game. This is probably the toughest game left on the schedule for Clemson. So that if Syracuse is for real, they've got to win this game. It's as simple as that. They're going to have to beat Clemson. Can they do it? We'll find out. TCU, plenty of tough games left in the Big 12. Tennessee, of course, the big game against Georgia. Other than that, they're going to be favored in every game that they play. UCLA, I'm not crazy about their schedule because they do have to play Oregon on the road, and I believe USC is on the road as well. So UCLA has some tough games coming up, but they've proven they're a really good team, and maybe they could be there. Even if they have one loss, they could possibly be there at the end of the year. So those are the teams still undefeated. Let's look at the updated playoff picture. This is kind of looking at where the teams are now and also if the favorites win out the rest of the season. Not my prediction. I don't do my playoff prediction until later on in the week. But this is kind of how it looks right now. So with Alabama losing, I think Georgia becomes the favorite to be the number 1 seed. Of course, Alabama could beat Georgia in the SEC championship, assuming Georgia's undefeated, and then Alabama's going to be ahead of Georgia in the standings. Maybe Ohio State goes to 1, and we see Georgia and Alabama, or Alabama at 2 and Georgia at 3. That is a scenario, but with Alabama already having a loss, I believe more than likely Georgia's going to be favored in that SEC championship. So yes, Georgia, the favorite for number 1, Ohio State, the favorite for number 2. But I tell you what, after watching Michigan on Saturday, I am not feeling very super confident that Ohio State will beat Michigan. That's now a toss-up to me. Michigan looks really, really good. We haven't seen Ohio State play a great team, so it's hard to really know just how good they are. Maybe they're better than Michigan. Maybe they're not. And, Michigan beat them last year. So that's an interesting thing to watch there with Michigan and Ohio State. But I believe Ohio State will be favored. They're playing at home, and that's why I put them there at number 2. Like I said about Clemson, they're going to be favored in the rest of their games, so they would wind up at number 3, an undefeated Clemson team at number 3. And then that battle for number 4 just got a whole lot more interesting. You've got Michigan, let's say they lose to Ohio State in a close game. You've got Tennessee, let's say they lose to Georgia in a close game, and they only have 1 loss. These teams wouldn't be conference champions, but both teams would have a great argument. And if it did come down to a 1-loss Michigan and a 1-loss Tennessee, I kind of feel like that goes to Tennessee. I don't know. It's tough. You have to look at where teams finish. So let's say LSU finishes in the top 15. That's going to help Tennessee. But let's say Maryland gets hot and they finish in the top 15. That's going to help Michigan. So where a lot of these teams finish is going to determine who has the better resume. I feel like Tennessee will have the better resume just mostly because Michigan played an awful non-conference schedule. And, of course, Tennessee would have that big win over Alabama. So probably going to go with Tennessee if it did come down to those 2 teams. TCU now I think has to be considered the favorite in the Big 12. They've already gotten past Oklahoma State. I'm not saying that they're going to win the Big 12, but again, right now looking at it, they're probably the favorites. And UCLA, the only undefeated team left in the Pac-12, so they'd be the favorite to come out of the Pac-12. Even though if you really break down the games, I don't know, maybe USC is still the favorite in the Pac-12. Maybe it's Oregon. But again, I want to give them some credit for where they are right now, and they're the only undefeated team in that conference. So UCLA and TCU, I think, deserve to be on this graphic. Not saying they're going to stay here all year long, but where they're at right now, absolutely they deserve to be here. But I'm really intrigued if it does come down to Michigan and Tennessee for that final spot. If both teams have one close loss to a top 2 team, that will be very interesting. Probably the win over Alabama would be enough to get Tennessee in. Michigan would have the good win over Penn State, but that will be about it. So that's the updated playoff picture and the updated eliminations. Would love to get your thoughts on everything going on in this playoff picture. Let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.